The UN Climate Summit is into its second and final week in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. World leaders and delegates have been meeting in an attempt to tackle global warming. But progress is not being made, according to report cards being graded there. The CBC's Sarah Larniuk is in London tracking this story for us. So one of the big questions at this summit is the 1.5-degree warming target. Is that still even achievable?
This was absolutely the question going into this conference, and a hotly debated one. And what we know is that international commitments don't yet get the world to 1.5 degrees. And most countries are still falling behind even those lackluster goals. And what we're seeing is that representatives from national delegations and scientific bodies are still very hesitant to call that goal dead because, though reaching that target is increasingly unlikely, it is still not impossible. What many representatives in Egypt are shifting to now by way of messaging, though, is saying that every 1/10 of a degree matters. So 1.5 degrees may be falling out of reach, but 1.7 is still better than 1.8, and so on. But others are just refusing to let go of that 1.5-degree goal. I spoke with Catherine Abreu this morning, who is a longtime Canadian climate campaigner, and she is an advisor on Canada's Net Zero Advisory Body. That organization provides accountability to the federal government on targets. Here is some of what she had to say.
No, 1.5 is not dead. The thing that I think gets really missed in these conversations when we are being told to give up hope on limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is that it really hinges around government's ability to double down on the transition away from fossil fuels and toward renewable energy. Consistently, when I hear people talking about giving hope on 1.5, I see them really missing the conversation about the need to accelerate the energy transition.
We know the planet has already warmed by 1.1 degrees, and we always knew that 1.5 degrees would require international transformational change on a scale never seen before, and we just haven't witnessed it on the scale required yet.
Okay, so let's now touch on the Climate Action Tracker. Their report says the world has a 50-50 shot of keeping warming to 1.8 degrees and that Canada is failing to meet its commitments. Have we heard any more about that?
Yeah, so last week, Climate Action Tracker released their report, and today we heard from another coalition of NGOs that published their annual Climate Change Performance Index, and they ranked Canada at the very bottom of the pack. Of 63 countries, Canada is 58th. Canada, Russia, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia are the G20's worst performing countries. And according to Catherine Abreu, there's one sector to blame.
The main thing standing in Canada's way of meeting our climate commitments is emissions from our oil and gas industry, and the fact that we have failed to address emissions from that sector for decades of climate policy at this point.
The authors of the Climate Change Performance Index ultimately agree and pointed to oil and gas as key to Canada's failure on climate. The sector makes up 1/4 of Canada's emissions, and between 1990 and 2020, the sector's emissions increased by 74%. And on that note, a lot of noise has been made at this conference about the size of fossil fuel delegations. There are 600 lobbyists registered with oil and gas companies at COP27.
Thanks for this, Sarah. That is the CBC's Sarah Larniuk in London.